to me. It's kind
Seems like all mastering engineers use it all the time.
It's funny. I don't really use it very much anymore. I kind of go through. That was an interesting thing because I had a whole different rig then on that album than I do now. So I've quite a different sound actually, and that tends to happen over the course of your career. You'll kind of go through different sets of gear and you'll have a different sound. And I guess that Billie album was like the end of about 5 years with a particular collection of stuff. And now after that, I just changed. I don't have anything left from that setup, actually.
Really? You sold it all?
Well, except for the alpha compressor. That's the only thing that's common. I still have that.
Do you have like a set chain that you're working from? Like I've spoken with Pete Lyman from Infrasonic, and he's like, he has the same chain every time he does a master, right? And then there are some people that switch it up every single time. Is your chain static?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, my setup is like, I don't use any of these kind of switching, volume matching things. I just have like, it's basically at the moment anyway. It's the Lavry DAN5 D to A, and then there's a couple of tube things. There's like a pair of Pultecs, the Pulse Techniques Pultecs, and then the Kniff Soma. It's a lot of tube stuff. I've actually ordered the Kniff Solid State EQ as well, which is being built at the moment. And then I have the Elysia EQ, the Muse EQ, and the Elysia Alpha. And then I've got the D to A is the Lavry Saviter, which is the new A to D that they came out like about a year ago, I guess. And that's all connected. It's just wired point to point with, some custom cables. And so I try to keep the whole thing as clean as possible, as simple as possible. So if I don't want any tube stuff in it, I just go around the back and disconnect it and plug in the other stuff. And that's kind of how I've ended up working. It's a little bit like how I started, actually, because Paul, the aforementioned Paul Stubblebind, is a bit of an audiophile. So it was all kind of just plug in what you need. And actually, I've sort of kept that philosophy, really. I mean, I
just use what you need.
Just use what you need and make the signal chain as short as possible. And not, because otherwise you've got like stuff coming into one of those boxes on D subs, and there's miles of cable that stuff's going through, which it doesn't really need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have really high quality cables and all of that stuff, every mastering is really about every small advantage that you can possibly get in the quality of the sound. No matter how small, if it sounds better, then use it.
Yeah.
I mean, don't just use, like, some people, I'm actually appalled by, there's many people on that Facebook group I mentioned that are like, wire is wire, it doesn't make any difference. And that is completely not true.
Yeah, I've heard it makes a big difference. Yeah, I mean, I think in the mastering stage, you're really fighting for those small percentage points. So like every little, it's interesting how you said it. It's interesting that you really just need to like fight for all those little minute little percentages, and then you get that better product. Because I think, I guess mastering is basically the last, I don't know, up to 5% of the record.
Yeah,
if that. But but if it's not mastered well, you can ruin everything.
Well, exactly. And there's many ways that you can ruin it. But digital audio is a pretty freaky thing. Clocking, for example, is extremely important. The thing about digital audio that I kind of figured out over the years is that when it degrades, it degrades in really very subtle ways. I mean, actually, it's a big problem, but for some reason, it's hard to perceive at the time when you're listening to it. Bad clocking, if your clocking situation is not right, all kinds of bad things happen that are not perhaps immediately obvious, such as it affects dynamics badly from loud to soft. It'll kind of do weird stuff, where something's supposed to come in and have a lot of impact. All of a sudden it sounds kind of weak. So to have your system clocked correctly is very important. I mean, with a good clock, and I've tried a bunch of them, and I don't know, the Lavery clocks that I use at the moment are the clocks in those things. I think sound really good.
Yeah, and in terms of also the small things, like the low end in your masters always sounds so good. Do you have any thoughts when you're approaching the low end inside a master of? Yeah, I guess just walk me through your low end situation.
Low end is an interesting thing. I mean, it has to be. It's nice if it's kind of extended feeling, but also you don't want it using up too much energy in the mix because there's only so much energy to go around. So you want most of it for the mid-range, really, where all the stuff is, So the low frequency, it's the good sounding low. That's the point of the tube stuff. Actually, is that the Pultex, for example, just running it through the box because it still goes through the tube stage, even if you have the EQ section bypassed. That will make the low end sound, it'll give you that extended kind of low end.
Yeah.
And in fact, a little too much. A lot of times I'll notch out sort of like about 25, 30 cycles or something like that. I'll take a bite out of it because there's a little too much of the low thing. And the idea really is to have the perception of a lot of low end without actually there being a lot of low end. That's kind of the goal.
Right. The mid-range is where you make records feel loud, right? It's not.
Well, it's where the vocal, it's where all the stuff is, basically. So you don't want to take away from that. So yeah, I that is an interesting thing. I mean, for the Billie record, it's mostly Finneas, honestly, with the low end thing. That's kind of the way that it sounded anyway. So,
but you left it in there without eating up all of your headroom.
Yeah, well, that record is, the way that stuff was like, it's basically a lot of low end and the vocal. That's about it, really.
Yeah.
So the vocal has the entire top to itself. So all the other elements are pretty dark. So it's kind of unusual in that respect. So it's kind of like, it's sort of like the way a hip hop record is. It's just low end, a little kind of keyboard thing and a vocal and a hi-hat, and that's about it, So you can have a lot of low end. Under those circumstances, if there's a lot of guitars and stuff, then that's not going to work.
Right. And so in terms of like, I guess, getting that perceived loudness in the low end when it's not there, so is that really, is it an EQ thing? Is it a dynamics thing? What does that usually look like?
Yeah, it could be an EQ thing, or it could be a tube thing, like I mentioned.
And then it would be like saturation of those kinds of frequencies.
Saturation on the low end, I think, probably works kind of further up. I don't know, actually. It's interesting. It could be a transformer thing, too. The transformers, though, generally kind of tighten up the low end a little bit, I think. But yeah, I'm not sure actually what it is. It's probably like, sometimes if you sort of take out a bit around 100 cycles or 80 cycles, then the bottom end will kind of open up a bit. There's kind of thick bass. There's kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, you kind of have to listen to it and see. Well,
so every time is a little different.
Yeah, every time is different because then you've got the kick drum and you've got the bass, and usually you've got some kind of or 808 thing or something like that, or I don't know.
Yeah, so, I've been able to kind of lower the low end in a song on like the stereo bus with like a Pultec of like, I don't know, bumping at 40 and cutting at like 80 or like something like that, or even just even with a Pro Q3, you could just kind of, sometimes if you like cut the right frequency out then it just like all of a sudden it shifts down, which is just a wild thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's bizarre. I guess there's no logic to it.
Yeah, well, there is. It's kind of like I say, it's a sort of distribution of energy thing, really. And that's basically, I think, I think my view of mastering is that you work on a full range system, so you can hear everything from top to bottom, and then somehow or another in my mind, it's like when you get it so that it's standing up straight, so that it's got enough of a foundation, and it's not like leaning over. It's not the top, there's too much top or there's too much middle and it's kind of bulging that way or something. You get it when you get everything in a straight line, then I think that's, my theory is anyway, that's what enables it to translate on different systems actually, because you've got basically the correct distribution of low to mid to high, those three things. So you're like, and I suppose the model for that is like a symphony orchestra. There's like, that's kind of how, when you go to the thing and you listen to those instruments, and that's how they sort of evolve together, is there's low end, there's mid-range, there's high, and it's kind of that kind of balance of those three things. Yeah.
Has that, when you talk about the straight line, of balance, has that shifted over the years as kind of more low end has come into vogue? Or has it always been?
No, I don't think so. I think it's constant. I think and you've got things like, 2001, The Chronic, which is one of my favorite albums.
I love that record.
And people think that rap music has a lot of low end on it. Some of it does, but actually there's not a lot of low end on that record.
But it punches so hard.
Yeah, it's very punchy, exactly. So that's like that's higher up. It's not like a massive...
That's 100.
It's not like a massive low frequency stuff that's wallowing around down there. It's focused. And it works for the song. Yeah, it works for the, it's part of the whole setup of the thing. So, and I was listening to, actually, yesterday I spent some time listening to Kendrick's new album.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. If you have a lot of low end, some of the tracks have a lot of low end on them, but then you have other things, the rest of the arrangement is different to sort of make up for that. You can't have like...
counterbalance.
You can't have a lot of everything.
I
can only have sort of like, if you have a lot of low end, then you can have a lot of high end, so kind of the high end will sit in the low end better. So you can have brighter elements. Yeah, it's like a sort of a
push and pull.
Zero sum. It's a zero sum situation.
You're figuring out how much energy you could kind of shove into digital zero.
And, just where you want the main focus of it to be, basically.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's low end and sometimes it's not. And it just depends on the source.
It depends on the type of music as well.
Amazing. You mentioned also that sometimes you're only in the box. Is that how often does that happen, that you just stay totally digital?
Only when I like using the analog gear because it's fun. And then when I just don't like any of it, I go through all the stuff and I'm like, then I'll do it in the box because, it actually sounds better. So, you have to be prepared to, ditch your favorite plan if it's not working. So if you listen to it and it's really not adding anything, in fact, it's probably making it worse, then don't use it, That doesn't happen very often. But
really,
it does happen. A lot of people these days are working, without mentioning names. I was talking to a few people at the Grammys, actually, and they were like 80, 90% in the box. It's quite shocking to me. And I suppose really, in a way, it's like, that's probably the thing to do if you don't have very much time and you have to get it right and you don't want to do anything that anybody's going to get upset about. You don't want to change it too much. You've been sent it and they're expecting it back later on today. Then under those circumstances, it's probably a good idea, actually. I should probably do that more often. Save myself a lot of trouble.